The spotlight felt warm on my face as I stood at the podium, holding the crystal award that represented 25 years of architectural excellence. The ballroom of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel buzzed with polite applause, the kind reserved for industry achievements that most people couldn't pronounce, let alone understand. "Thank you," I said into the microphone, my voice carrying across the sea of black ties and evening gowns. "This recognition means more to me than you know." That's when I saw her moving through the crowd like a shark through chum. Nina Foster, my wife of 28 years, glided between the round tables in that red dress I'd bought her for our anniversary. The one she claimed made her feel beautiful again. Her smile was radiant, camera-ready, the same one that had charmed donors at charity galas and made contractors bend over backward to please her. The applause began to fade as she approached the stage, heels clicking against the marble floor with military precision. Behind her, I caught sight of our adult children. Miles, 28 and dressed in his best investment banker costume, wore a grin that made my stomach clench. Sophie, 25 and perpetually attached to her phone, had actually looked up from her screen to watch whatever show was about to unfold. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nina's voice carried without amplification. She'd always had that gift. "I have something special for my husband on this wonderful night." The crowd murmured with anticipation. Some probably expected a surprise renewal of vows or a touching speech about supporting dreams. I knew better. The predatory gleam in her eyes, the way she clutched that manila envelope against her chest like a weapon. These weren't the gestures of a loving wife. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage, her perfume hitting me like a physical blow. White diamonds, the scent that used to make me think of Sunday mornings and lazy kisses. Now, it smelled like betrayal wrapped in expensive packaging. "Graham," she said, loud enough for the microphone to catch every syllable, "you've always been so good at building things. Tonight, I thought I'd help you tear something down." The envelope appeared in her manicured hands like a magic trick. She opened it with theatrical precision, removing a stack of papers thick enough to choke a horse. The letterhead was visible even from where I stood. Brennan, Walsh and Associates, the most ruthless divorce attorneys in the city. "Divorce papers," she announced to the crowd, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "I'm serving them right here, right now, because I want everyone to know that I'm finally free from this pathetic excuse for a man." The ballroom fell silent except for the soft whir of cameras. Someone had tipped off the society photographers, probably Nina herself. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a public execution. Miles started clapping first, slow and deliberate like he was applauding a particularly good tennis match. Sophie joined in, her face lit up with the kind of glee usually reserved for watching someone slip on ice. Soon, scattered applause rippled through the crowd. Not the warm appreciation I'd received moments before, but something colder, hungrier. The sound of people witnessing a spectacular fall from grace. I looked down at the papers she'd thrust into my hands. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Irreconcilable differences. The legal language blurred together, but the intent was crystal clear. She wanted everything: the house, the business, the respect I'd spent decades building. "Well," I said into the microphone, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. At least she spelled my name right. A few nervous chuckles from the audience. Nina's smile faltered for just a moment, like she'd expected me to break down or rage against the injustice. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my Mont Blanc pen, the one she'd given me when I'd landed my first major contract. I signed each page with deliberate care, the scratch of pen against paper amplified by the microphone. The sound seemed to echo in the cavernous ballroom, each signature a nail in the coffin of our marriage. When I finished, I handed the papers back to her with the same professional courtesy I'd show any client. "There you go," I said. "All yours." Then I leaned in close enough that only she could hear. close enough to smell the champagne on her breath and see the flecks of mascara at the corners of her eyes. "You truly don't know what you've done," I whispered. She laughed, actually laughed, tossing her head back like I'd told her the funniest joke in the world. "Oh, Graham, you always were dramatic. I know exactly what I've done. I've upgraded." She turned to face the crowd, raising the signed papers above her head like a trophy. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm finally free to be with a real man." The applause swelled again, and I watched our children beam with pride at their mother's performance. Miles pulled out his phone, probably already composing the social media post that would cement my humiliation in digital amber. Sophie was recording everything, her influencer instincts kicking in. This would be content gold for her followers. I stepped back from the microphone and walked off the stage, leaving my award on the podium. Behind me, Nina was still basking in her moment of triumph, accepting congratulations from people who'd been my colleagues and friends just minutes before. My phone buzzed as I reached the ballroom exit. A text notification from something called Foster Fam 4, our family group chat. Except when I tried to open it, I got an error message. I'd been removed from my own family's communication network. A hotel security guard appeared at my elbow, his smile professional but firm. "Mr. Foster, do you need help finding the exit?" I looked back at the stage where Nina was now posing for pictures, our children flanking her like bodyguards. The crystal award I'd been so proud of sat abandoned on the podium, forgotten in the chaos of my personal apocalypse. "No," I told the guard. "I can find my own way out." But as I walked through the hotel lobby, past the marble columns and crystal chandeliers that had witnessed my destruction, I realized I wasn't just finding my way out of the building. I was finding my way into something else entirely. Something that would make Nina's little performance look like amateur theater. She thought she knew what she'd done. She had no idea. The house felt like a tomb when I walked through the front door 3 hours later. Every light was off, every room silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the grandfather clock Nina had insisted we buy for the foyer. It had cost more than most people's cars, and she'd claimed it gave the place gravitas. Now it just counted down the seconds of my solitude. I flipped on the kitchen lights and immediately noticed the gaps. The coffee maker was gone, the expensive Italian one Nina had to have because it made her feel European. The knife block was empty, leaving only the outline of dust where it had sat for 15 years. Even the fruit bowl had vanished, though she'd left the bananas to rot on the bare counter like a final insult. A note sat propped against the empty napkin holder, written on Nina's personal stationery in her precise handwriting. "Met a real man. Don't call. The lawyer will handle everything from now on." I crumpled the note and tossed it toward the garbage can, but even that was gone. The paper bounced off the cabinet and rolled across the floor, coming to rest under the table where we'd eaten thousands of meals together, where we'd helped the kids with homework, where we'd planned our future like idiots who believed in forever. The living room was worse. The couch remained, but only because it was too heavy for her to move alone. Everything else, the lamps, the coffee table, the Persian rug that had taken us 6 months to pick out, all gone. She'd even taken the remote controls, leaving me with a 75-inch television I couldn't operate. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, though I supposed it was just my bedroom now. The closet doors hung open like broken wings, revealing empty hangers and bare shelves. She'd been thorough, taking not just her clothes, but half of mine too. My best suits were gone, along with the watch she'd given me for our 10th anniversary and the cufflinks that had belonged to my father. But it was the bathroom that really drove the knife home. She'd taken everything, her makeup, her lotions, her array of expensive shampoos that had cluttered every surface. The medicine cabinet was stripped bare except for a bottle of aspirin and my electric razor. Even my toothbrush holder was gone, leaving my toothbrush sitting naked on the counter like an abandoned orphan. I walked back downstairs, and poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon from the bottle she'd somehow missed in her pillaging. The liquor burned, but it was a good burn, a clean burn that cut through the numbness spreading through my chest. My phone rang. For a moment, hope fluttered in my stomach. Maybe Miles or Sophie had come to their senses. Maybe they wanted to hear my side of the story. But the caller ID showed Deke's bar, and I remembered that my old friend still worked nights there, still poured drinks for people whose lives had gone sideways. Jesus Christ, Graham. Deke's gravelly voice filled the silence. I just saw the video. Sophie posted it on every platform known to man. What the hell happened? Nina happened, I said, taking another sip of bourbon. 28 years of marriage, and she decided to end it with a public execution. You need to get down here. Now. We need to talk. I'm not really in the mood for company. This isn't about company, you stubborn bastard. This is about survival. She didn't just divorce you tonight. She declared war. And if you're going to fight back, you need intelligence. Deke had been a cop for 20 years before the job broke him down, and he'd retreated behind the bar. He still had contacts, still knew how to dig up information that respectable people preferred to keep buried. If anyone could help me understand what Nina had really done, it was him. Give me an hour, I said. Make it 30 minutes. And Graham, don't drink any more of whatever you're drinking. You need to be sharp for this conversation. The drive to Deke's took me through the part of town where Nina would never venture, where the streets were cracked and the streetlights flickered like dying stars. The bar itself was a dive that had been old when we were young, with neon beer signs in the windows and the kind of jukebox that still played actual records. Deke stood behind the bar like he'd been born there, his gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and his face mapped with lines that told stories about the things he'd seen. He was wiping down glasses with mechanical precision, but his eyes tracked every customer, every shadow, every potential threat. Bourbon? He asked when I slid onto a bar stool. I've had enough bourbon for one night. Coffee, then. Black. You look like hell, by the way. Thanks. That's exactly what my ego needed to hear. He poured the coffee from a pot that looked older than both of us combined, but it was strong and hot and helped clear some of the fog from my head. The bar was mostly empty except for a few regulars who minded their own business, and a couple in the corner booth who were too busy groping each other to pay attention to anyone else. So, Deke said, leaning against the bar with his arms crossed, you want to tell me how you managed to get blindsided by your own wife? I thought we were happy, I said, and immediately felt stupid for saying it. I mean, we had problems like every couple, but nothing that seemed terminal. When's the last time you really looked at her? Not just glanced over the breakfast table or nodded when she talked about her day? When did you last really see your wife? I tried to remember, but the memories blurred together into a montage of routine. Nina getting ready for charity events while I worked late at the office. Nina talking about people I didn't know while I half-listened and scrolled through emails. Nina sleeping on her side of the bed while I lay awake thinking about blueprints and building codes. That's what I thought, Deke said. You want my professional opinion? This wasn't spontaneous. She's been planning this for months, maybe years. Nobody serves divorce papers at a public event without serious preparation. What do you mean? I mean she wanted maximum humiliation. She wanted to destroy not just your marriage, but your reputation, your relationship with your kids, your standing in the community. That takes time and strategy. He was right, and I'd been too shocked to see it. The photographers had been ready, the children had been coached, even the timing was perfect. Right after I'd received the award, when my professional triumph could be immediately overshadowed by personal devastation. There's something else, Deke continued. Sophie's video has already gone viral. Divorce at the awards is trending on Twitter. Your humiliation is entertainment for strangers. I pulled out my phone and searched for the hashtag. The video was everywhere. News sites, social media, even late-night talk show clips. In every version, I looked like a pathetic old man getting his comeuppance from a strong, independent woman who'd finally found the courage to leave. "The comments are brutal," I said, scrolling through hundreds of responses. "Good for her. He looks like the type who never appreciated what he had. She's glowing. Must be the freedom." "Public opinion is a weapon," Deke said, "and she just used it to cut your throat. But here's the thing about weapons. They can be turned around." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that if your wife wanted to play dirty, maybe it's time to get your hands dirty too. But first, we need to know what we're really dealing with. Who's the real man she mentioned?" I'd been so focused on the public humiliation that I'd almost forgotten Nina's parting shot about upgrading to someone better. But now, sitting in the dim light of Deke's bar, the words echoed in my memory with new significance. "I have no idea," I admitted. "Then that's where we start. Give me 48 hours and I'll have a name, an address, and a complete background check. In the meantime, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this goes deeper than you think." "How much deeper?" Deke's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Let's just say that in my experience, women who plan public executions usually have more than one secret to hide." 2 days later, Deke called with news that hit me like a sledgehammer to the solar plexus. I was sitting in my office trying to concentrate on blueprints for a shopping center renovation when my phone buzzed with his number. "His name is Trent Blackwell," Deke said without preamble. 28 years old, personal trainer at Elite Fitness on Riverside Drive, drives a white Mercedes C-Class that's leased under Nina's name. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. "How long?" "Best I can tell, at least 8 months. Maybe longer. I've got photos of them together going back to last October, and that's just when they stopped being careful about it." "Photos?" "Meet me at Murphy's Deli in an hour. Come alone and bring your checkbook. This kind of information doesn't come free." Murphy's was the kind of place where city workers grabbed lunch and nobody asked questions about private conversations. Deke was already waiting in a corner booth when I arrived, a manila envelope sitting on the table between us like evidence in a murder trial. "Before you look at these," he said, "you need to understand something. This isn't just an affair. This is a complete financial takeover. Your wife has been systematically transferring assets, opening credit accounts, and building a paper trail that makes her look like the victim of financial abuse." "That's impossible. I would have noticed." "Would you? When's the last time you looked at your credit report? When did you last check the joint accounts that you assumed were still joint?" The envelope felt heavy in my hands as I opened it. The first photograph showed Nina and a man I didn't recognize walking out of a restaurant downtown. He was everything I wasn't. Young, muscled, with the kind of artificial tan that screamed personal trainer. His hand was on the small of her back in a gesture so intimate it made my stomach clench. The second photo was worse. They were kissing in the parking lot of a hotel, Nina's arms wrapped around his neck like she was drowning, and he was her life preserver. She looked happier than I'd seen her in years. "There are 12 more," Deke said quietly, "including some taken outside an apartment complex that she's been paying for. Guess whose name is on the lease?" "His." "Bingo. She's been keeping your replacement in style for the better part of a year. Rent, car payments, gym membership, even his grocery bills, all funded by joint accounts that you've been contributing to like a good husband." I flipped through the rest of the photos, each one a knife twist in my chest. Nina laughing at something Trent said. Nina wearing a dress I'd never seen. Nina looking at him the way she used to look at me, back when we were young and stupid enough to believe in happily ever after. "The kids know," I said, though it came out more like a question. "Oh, they know. Sophie's been posting cryptic messages about supporting Mom's happiness for months. Miles has been seen having lunch with Pretty Boy here at least 3 times. They're not just complicit, they're collaborators." The betrayal felt complete now, a perfect circle of deception that had left me standing alone in the center while my entire family plotted my destruction. But underneath the hurt, something else was growing. something cold and calculating that felt almost foreign in my chest. "I want to destroy him," I said. "Him? Graham, he's just the weapon. Nina's the one who pulled the trigger. Then I want to destroy them both." Deke leaned back in the booth and studied my face like he was seeing me for the first time. "Now you're talking. But if we're going to do this right, we need to be smart about it. No crimes, no violence, nothing that can come back to bite us in court. We're going to use the same weapons she used: information, timing, and public opinion." "What did you have in mind?" "First, we document everything. Every financial transaction, every lie, every piece of evidence that shows this was planned and coordinated. Then, we wait for the right moment to detonate it all." "What's the right moment?" Deke's smile was predatory. "The moment when she thinks she's won everything." Over the next 3 weeks, I learned things about my wife that made me question whether I'd ever known her at all. The private investigator Deke recommended, a former FBI agent who specialized in financial crimes, uncovered a web of deception that was breathtaking in its scope. Nina had been siphoning money from our joint accounts for over a year, small amounts at first, but growing bolder as time went on. She'd opened credit cards in my name and used them to fund her new life, then transferred the balances to accounts I couldn't access. She'd even taken out a second mortgage on our house, forging my signature on documents that put us hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. But the financial betrayal was nothing compared to the personal destruction she'd orchestrated. The investigator found emails between Nina and our children dating back 18 months, emails that painted me as an emotionally distant workaholic who'd never appreciated his family. She'd been poisoning them against me systematically, preparing them for the day when they'd have to choose sides. "She's good," the investigator admitted during our final meeting. "This is the most thorough character assassination I've seen outside of a political campaign. She didn't just want to leave you, she wanted to erase you." I tried calling Miles and Sophie repeatedly during those 3 weeks, but my calls went straight to voicemail. When I showed up at Miles's apartment, the doorman told me I was on a list of people who weren't allowed up. Sophie blocked me on every social media platform and changed her phone number. The birthday card I sent to Sophie came back marked "Return to Sender" in handwriting I recognized as hers. Even my own daughter couldn't be bothered to throw away my attempt at reconciliation. She had to send it back like a rejection letter. But the worst part was the silence from Nina herself. No angry phone calls, no demands for explanations, no attempts at justification. She'd simply vanished from my life as completely as if she'd never existed, leaving only the legal machinery of divorce to grind through the details of our dissolution. 3 months after the ceremony, I was sitting in my empty house, surrounded by boxes of evidence and consumed by a rage that had crystallized into something harder and more focused than anything I'd ever felt. That's when Deke called with the news that would change everything. "She's getting sloppy," he said. "Trent's been bragging at the gym about his sugar mama and how he's going to be rich when she gets her settlement. But here's the interesting part. He's also been seen with other women, lots of other women." "He's cheating on her?" "Like a dog in heat. And I've got video proof of at least 3 separate encounters in the past month. Turns out your wife's boy toy isn't quite as devoted as she thinks." For the first time in months, I smiled. Really smiled. The kind that comes from deep in your chest and spreads through your whole body like warm honey. "When do we spring the trap?" I asked. "Soon," Deke said. "Very soon." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would create a fake business emergency that required Nina's immediate attention, something involving our joint assets that she couldn't ignore. When she arrived at the designated location, I'd be waiting with hidden cameras and a carefully scripted conversation designed to extract the truth she'd been hiding. The location was perfect. An abandoned warehouse that my architectural firm had been hired to renovate but hadn't started work on yet. It was isolated enough for privacy, but public enough that Nina wouldn't feel threatened. I set up the meeting for a Thursday evening, telling her through her lawyer that there was a problem with the property that could affect our divorce settlement. She arrived exactly on time because Nina had always been punctual when money was involved. I watched through a grimy window as she parked her BMW, my BMW technically, since I was still making the payments, and walked toward the entrance in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Graham?" Her voice echoed in the empty space as she stepped inside. "What's this about? My lawyer said there was some kind of emergency." I emerged from the shadows like a ghost, keeping my expression neutral and professional. The hidden cameras were rolling, positioned to capture every word and gesture from multiple angles. "Hello, Nina. Thanks for coming." She looked around the warehouse with obvious distaste, her nose wrinkling at the smell of dust and old machinery. "This better be important. I have dinner plans." "With Trent?" The name hit her like a physical blow. Her composure cracked for just a moment, long enough for me to see the flash of panic in her eyes before the mask slipped back into place. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. Trent Blackwell, 28, personal trainer, drives the Mercedes you lease for him. Ring any bells?" She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin in the gesture I'd once found regal, but now recognized as pure arrogance. "My personal life is none of your business anymore. We're divorced, remember?" "Actually, we're not divorced yet. The papers are still working their way through the system, which means you committed adultery while we were still married, using my money to fund your affair." "Prove it." That's when I knew I had her. The old Nina would have denied everything, would have played the wounded wife card and accused me of paranoid delusions. But this Nina, the one who'd been planning my destruction for months, was confident enough to challenge me directly. "I don't have to prove it," I said, pulling out my phone and opening the voice recorder app. "You're going to tell me everything yourself." "Like hell I am." "You are, because you can't resist gloating. It's your fatal flaw, Nina. You never could win gracefully." I was right, and we both knew it. She'd spent months orchestrating my humiliation, and now she finally had the chance to explain exactly how clever she'd been. The temptation was too strong to resist. "You want the truth?" she said, her voice rising with excitement. "Fine. I'll give you the truth. I've been planning this for 2 years, ever since I realized what a pathetic excuse for a husband you'd become." 2 years? 2 years of watching you come home late, of eating dinner alone while you worked on your precious buildings, of sleeping next to a man who cared more about blueprints than his own wife. Do you have any idea how lonely I was? So you decided to cheat. I decided to find someone who actually wanted me, someone young and strong and passionate, someone who made me feel alive again instead of like a piece of furniture you'd forgotten you owned. The words poured out of her like poison from a wound, each confession more damaging than the last. She told me about meeting Trent at the gym, about the apartment she'd rented for their encounters, about the credit cards she'd opened in my name to fund their relationship. "The kids know," she continued, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "They've known for months, and they support me completely. They see what I see, that you're a selfish, emotionally unavailable man who never deserved the family he had." "What did you tell them about me?" "The truth. That you forgot my birthday 3 years running. That you missed Sophie's college graduation for a business meeting. That you've been so focused on your career that you never noticed your wife was dying inside." Some of it was true, and that made it hurt worse than if she'd simply lied. I had missed Sophie's graduation, though it was for a client emergency, not a routine meeting. I had forgotten Nina's birthday, though I'd made up for it with a surprise trip to Paris. But in her version of events, my imperfections became evidence of fundamental character flaws. "So you decided to destroy me publicly." "I decided to free myself publicly. There's a difference. By serving divorce papers at my award ceremony, by turning our children against me, by stealing money from our joint accounts. I didn't steal anything. I took what I was entitled to as your wife, And as for the ceremony, she smiled, and it was the cruelest expression I'd ever seen on her face. That was just good theater. I wanted everyone to see that I wasn't some pathetic, abandoned wife. I was a strong woman taking control of her life. With Trent's help. Trent is more of a man than you'll ever be. He appreciates me. He desires me. He makes me feel like a woman instead of a business partner. He's also cheating on you. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Nina's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, denial, and finally a desperate kind of anger. That's a lie. I have photos, video, hotel receipts. Your boy toy has been very busy while you've been planning our divorce. I pulled out my phone and showed her the evidence Deke had compiled. Trent with a blonde at a restaurant across town. Trent with a brunette at a movie theater. Trent with a redhead in the parking lot of a different gym, his hands all over her the same way they'd been all over Nina in the photos I'd seen. He's using you, I said quietly, just like you used me. The only difference is that you were too stupid to see it coming. Nina stared at the photos with the expression of someone watching her entire world collapse in real time. The confident woman who'd walked into the warehouse was gone, replaced by someone smaller and more fragile than I'd seen in years. "This doesn't change anything," she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. "It changes everything. See, I've been recording this entire conversation, and I'm going to send it to Miles and Sophie. They're going to hear exactly what you think of their father, exactly how you manipulated them, exactly how the strong, independent woman they've been supporting is really just a middle-aged adulteress who got played by a kid young enough to be her son." "You wouldn't." "Watch me." I hit send on the group text I'd already composed, attaching both the audio file of our conversation and the photos of Trent's infidelity. Within seconds, my phone started buzzing with responses. Miles: "Mom, is this real?" Sophie: "What the hell is going on?" Miles: "Dad, are you there?" Sophie: "Mom, you need to call me right now." Nina pulled out her own phone and stared at it like a foreign object. No messages, no calls, nothing but silence from the children who'd been her allies in my destruction. "They blocked you," I said, though I was guessing, but the look on her face told me I was right. "This isn't over," she said, but her voice was shaking now. "Yes, it is. Your boy toy is going to disappear the moment he realizes his sugar mama is about to lose everything in the divorce. Your children are going to figure out that you lied to them about their father for 2 years. And your friends, the ones who applauded your performance at the ceremony, are going to distance themselves faster than you can say, 'adultery scandal.'" She walked toward the exit on unsteady legs, her perfect composure finally cracking completely. At the doorway, she turned back to look at me one last time. "I hate you," she said. "I know," I replied, "but you're going to hate yourself more." After she left, I sat in the empty warehouse for a long time, listening to my phone buzz with messages from Miles and Sophie. They wanted to talk, wanted to explain, wanted to apologize for believing their mother's lies. But I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. First, I had one more call to make. "Deke, it's done. She confessed to everything." "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a moment, taking inventory of the emotions swirling through my chest. The rage was still there, but it was cooler now, more controlled. The hurt remained, but it was manageable, like an old wound that had finally stopped bleeding. "I feel like I'm ready for the final act," I said. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to give Nina the same gift she gave me. A public ceremony she'll never forget." 3 months later, I stood at the same podium in the same hotel ballroom, holding a different award from a different organization. The Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Institute of Architects, the highest honor my profession could bestow. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was back in the place where my marriage had died, about to celebrate the resurrection of my career. The audience was different this time. Miles sat in the front row, his face a mixture of pride and residual guilt. Sophie was next to him, actually paying attention instead of staring at her phone. They'd both moved back home after learning the truth about their mother, spending weeks apologizing and trying to rebuild the relationship Nina had systematically destroyed. "It's been an interesting year," I said into the microphone, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "I've learned a lot about the difference between building something and destroying it, between creating lasting value and pursuing temporary pleasure." In the back of the room, barely visible in the shadows, Nina sat alone at a table for 8. She'd crashed the event, just as I'd known she would. Her pride wouldn't let her stay away from what she'd see as my moment of triumph, and her desperation wouldn't let her miss any opportunity to salvage her reputation. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished in a way that went beyond the obvious signs of financial stress. Her dress was off the rack instead of designer, her jewelry was costume instead of real, and her hair showed gray roots that she couldn't afford to touch up anymore. Trent had disappeared within days of our warehouse confrontation, just as I'd predicted, leaving her alone with the wreckage of the life she'd tried to build on lies. "Architecture is about vision," I continued, making eye contact with various people in the audience. "It's about seeing something that doesn't exist yet and having the patience and skill to make it real. But it's also about understanding that some structures are built on faulty foundations, and when those foundations crack, the whole building comes down." A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Word had spread through our social circle about Nina's spectacular fall from grace, the adultery, the financial fraud, the manipulation of our children. She'd gone from being seen as a strong woman who'd finally found the courage to leave an inadequate husband to being viewed as a calculating adulteress who'd gotten her comeuppance. "I want to thank my children, Miles and Sophie, for having the wisdom to recognize truth when they finally heard it," I said, nodding toward the front row. "And I want to thank my friends and colleagues who stood by me during a very difficult period in my life." That was Deke's cue. He stood up from his table near the middle of the room, raising his glass in a toast. Around him, other people began to stand as well. Clients, colleagues, friends who'd learned the real story of my divorce and chosen to support me instead of my ex-wife. The applause started slowly but built into something thunderous, a standing ovation that went on for nearly 2 minutes. I let it wash over me, savoring every second of vindication after months of humiliation and isolation. When the applause finally died down, I leaned into the microphone for my closing remarks. There's an old saying in construction: measure twice, cut once. It means you should be absolutely certain about your plans before you make irreversible changes. Some people never learn that lesson. They cut first and measure later, if at all. And when they do, I paused, letting my eyes find Nina in the shadows. "Well, let's just say the results speak for themselves." The audience erupted again, and this time I could see people turning to look at Nina, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. She sat frozen in her chair like a deer caught in headlights, finally understanding that she wasn't witnessing my triumph. She was starring in her own public execution. Security guards appeared at her table, not hotel security, but private contractors I'd hired for the evening. They spoke to her quietly, professionally, but the message was clear: she needed to leave. Now. As she gathered her purse and stood to go, the applause continued, but its nature had changed. It was no longer just appreciation for my achievements, it was celebration of her downfall, the sound of a community that had chosen sides and was making its choice known. Nina walked toward the exit with as much dignity as she could muster, but I could see the tremor in her hands and the way her shoulders shook with suppressed sobs. At the doorway, she turned back one last time, her eyes finding mine across the crowded room. I raised my crystal award in a mock toast, mouthing the words, "Thank you," with exaggerated sincerity. Her face crumpled, and she stumbled through the exit like a broken woman, fleeing the scene of her own destruction. The applause continued for another full minute after she disappeared, and I stood at the podium, basking in the warmth of complete vindication. Miles and Sophie were on their feet, tears streaming down their faces as they applauded their father's resurrection. Deke was grinning like a proud parent, and even the hotel staff had stopped serving to watch the spectacle. When the noise finally subsided, I stepped away from the microphone and walked down into the audience to accept congratulations from people who'd written me off just months earlier. The transformation was complete. I'd gone from public laughingstock to sympathetic victim to triumphant survivor, all while Nina had traveled the opposite trajectory. Later that night, as the last guests were leaving and the hotel staff was cleaning up, Deke found me on the balcony overlooking the city lights. "How does it feel?" he asked. I thought about the question seriously, taking inventory of the emotions swirling through my chest. The rage was gone, burned away by the heat of complete victory. The hurt had faded to a manageable ache, like the phantom pain from an amputated limb. What remained was something I hadn't felt in years: satisfaction. "It feels like justice," I said finally. "Think she learned her lesson?" I looked down at the street below, where Nina's old BMW was pulling away from the curb. She was alone in the car, probably going back to the studio apartment she'd rented after losing our house in the divorce settlement. Her children wouldn't speak to her, her friends had abandoned her, and her lover had moved on to easier targets. "She learned something," I said. "Whether it was the right lesson remains to be seen. Any regrets?" I considered the question carefully. Did I regret the marriage, the children, the years of building a life that had turned out to be constructed on lies? Did I regret the months of planning and plotting that had led to this moment of complete triumph? "Just one," I said finally. "I regret that it took me so long to realize what she really was." Deke nodded and headed back inside, leaving me alone with the city lights and the satisfaction of a job well done. Below me, traffic moved through the streets like blood through arteries, carrying people to and from their own dramas and triumphs and defeats. Somewhere out there, Nina was driving home to her empty apartment, finally understanding what I'd meant when I whispered that she didn't know what she'd done. She'd thought she was destroying me, but she'd actually been destroying herself, one lie and betrayal at a time. I stayed on the balcony until the hotel staff began turning off the lights, savoring the perfect symmetry of it all. She'd served me divorce papers at my moment of professional triumph, thinking she could overshadow my success with personal humiliation. Tonight I'd returned the favor, using her own weapons against her with surgical precision. The city spread out below me like a blueprint, all straight lines and right angles and logical connections. It was beautiful in its orderliness, its adherence to rules and principles that made sense. Unlike marriage, unlike family, unlike the messy emotional architecture that Nina had spent 2 years trying to demolish. But I was still standing. Battered, certainly. Changed, absolutely. But standing nonetheless, while she had been reduced to rubble by her own destructive impulses. As I finally turned to leave, I realized that this was what victory actually felt like. Not the hot rush of revenge, but the cool satisfaction of watching justice unfold according to its own inexorable logic. Nina had measured wrong and cut too deep, and now she was living with the consequences of her miscalculations. I walked through the empty ballroom one last time, past the tables where my friends and colleagues had chosen to stand with me, past the podium where I'd reclaimed my dignity, past the shadows where my ex-wife had been forced to witness her own irrelevance. The crystal award felt solid in my hands as I headed for the exit, a tangible reminder that some things, talent, integrity, the respect of one's peers, couldn't be destroyed by lies or stolen by betrayal. They had to be earned, and once earned, they belonged to you forever. Nina had forgotten that lesson, if she'd ever learned it at all. She'd thought she could tear down in minutes what had taken decades to build, but she'd been wrong about that too. Some foundations are too deep to shake, too solid to crack, too well-engineered to fail. I pushed through the hotel's revolving door and stepped out into the night air, breathing deeply of the cool autumn breeze that carried the promise of winter and renewal. Behind me, the hotel's lights were going dark one by one, but ahead of me, the city blazed with endless possibilities. The war was over. I had won. And Nina had learned what I'd tried to tell her that night at the podium, when she'd been too drunk on her own perceived victory to listen. She truly hadn't known what she'd done, but now she did.